When I entered the neighborhood on my way home from work, my eyes once again fell on her, the young beauty who made my heart race every time I saw her. She was often standing at her door at this hour, and our gazes would meet for a fleeting moment. Her face was graced with a captivating smile, and she wore a form-fitting outfit, her loose scarf doing little to conceal her youthful charm. Her long golden hair reached down to her waist, and I would find myself captivated, unable to look away. Today, too, I felt as though simply reaching my front door would be an impossible task after seeing her. Her smile made me want to stop right where I stood, but I was a respectable man, someone the neighbors held in high regard. Giving in to my feelings and lingering at her door was out of the question. With one last glance in her direction, I forced myself to walk on and head home, though I left my heart behind. As I stepped into my house, I caught sight of my wife, and all my good mood instantly vanished. She had put on so much weight, 4 children had completely changed her appearance. Her once attractive figure was now lost, and her charm had faded. She was always busy, always preoccupied. Even now, her hair was disheveled, and she had one child in her arms while chasing another through the courtyard. The scene was chaotic, and looking at her drained the last bit of enthusiasm from me. I dropped my bag on the sofa and sat down heavily. The moment she noticed me, she abandoned whatever she was doing and rushed over with a glass of water. I looked at her from head to toe. She wore a loose, simple outfit, her hair tied back in a plain bun. I couldn't even remember the last time I saw her hair let down. She always kept it tied up as she bustled around the house. Those 4 children had stolen the glow from her face, leaving behind dark circles under her eyes, and a pallor that I found more depressing than endearing. She handed me the glass, and I couldn't help but say, "You should take care of yourself too. What's become of you?" My words made her visibly self-conscious. She tried to explain, saying, "I was just about to freshen up, but the little one needed his diaper changed. I thought I'd handle that first and then get ready, but you arrived in the meantime." It was the same excuse she always gave. She always made it seem like she was perpetually busy, as if the housework never ended. But to me, it felt like she only started doing things once I got home, and that's why she always looked so flustered. I drank the water and told her to make tea. Then I went to the bedroom, stretched out on the bed, and closed my eyes. The image of that beautiful young woman from the neighborhood began to dance before my mind's eye again. I couldn't stop picturing her. It was as if my heart longed to go back, to stop in front of her door, to exchange a few tender words, to feel even the slightest breeze of romance. My wife, on the other hand, only ever had practical things to say. Complaints about running out of diapers, requests to pick up milk, questions about what to cook, and worries about household expenses. I had grown weary of these monotonous conversations. I yearned for something more, something sweeter, something that made me feel alive again. I couldn't help but imagine that this young woman might say the kind of gentle, comforting words I so desperately wanted to hear. And even if she didn't speak, her beauty alone seemed to offer me peace and solace. Lying there, I heard my wife's voice calling out, "The tea's ready. I've left it on the table. I'm going to help the older one with his homework, then drop him off at tuition. You can rest until I get back. I have something important to talk to you about later." Her voice brought me back to reality, but I didn't even open my eyes to look at her. I just muttered a vague, and let her go about her tasks. I wondered what important things she wanted to discuss, but I didn't give it much thought. I remained lying on the bed, lost in the fleeting image of a woman who, in my imagination, represented the youth, beauty, and excitement that had long since faded from my home. When I woke up, it was 8 in the evening. I looked around, but my wife wasn't in the room. I got up and stepped out and found her in the kitchen, moving quickly as she prepared dinner and washed dishes simultaneously. Upon seeing me, she said, "I came to talk to you, but you were fast asleep." She hesitated for a moment before continuing. "My younger sister's wedding has been finalized. Her nekah is next week, and I'd like to go back home for a few days to help out and give some gifts. I'll need some money for that, too." Mentioning her trip to her family home always put me on edge, so she spoke cautiously. But to her surprise, and mine as well, I didn't feel irritated at all this time. Instead, I was relieved. Her leaving would mean I could do as I pleased without worry. Sure, I replied. Not just for a week, take 15 days. Your younger sister's wedding's a big deal. It'll be good for you to get a change of scenery. You're always working here anyway. Her face lit up with happiness. She thanked me repeatedly, her smile bright. I'm making your favorite dish tonight, she added cheerfully. That evening, after finishing her chores, she began packing. I handed her 5,000 rupees for the gifts, eager to get this over with. She carefully tucked the money away. She didn't ask for new clothes for the wedding or make any other demands. She simply packed her old clothes into a bag. Drop us off on your way to the office tomorrow morning, she requested. Though her family's home was far away, I found it easier to comply. Watching her tired, worn-out expression, day after day, had started to bore me. Sure, I said. Be ready in the morning. The next day, I loaded her and the 4 children onto the motorcycle and drove them straight to her family's house. Once I dropped them off, I gave them a quick farewell and headed to work. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of relief. Finally, I could make my move. I planned to speak to the beautiful woman from my neighborhood, ask her name, and even invite her to my home. Now that my wife and kids were gone, there was no one to interfere. That evening, however, I got delayed at work. By the time I returned, it was after sunset. The streets were unusually quiet. As I turned into our lane, I saw her standing there again, just as captivating as always. She smiled, and I felt like she had been waiting just for me. I slowed my bike as I approached her, returning her smile. She greeted me with a warm salam. To my surprise, she didn't stop there. We've recently moved to this neighborhood, she said. We don't know many people yet. Would you like to come in for some tea? My mother's home too. You can meet her as well. We're really hoping to get to know more neighbors, but so far, it's been quite lonely. Her words caught me off guard, and something in me compelled me to accept her invitation. Glancing around, I noticed the street was empty, and without giving it much more thought, I agreed. Quickly, I followed her into the house. Inside, I saw an older woman sitting on a charpoy, traditional woven cot. I greeted her with salam, and she smiled warmly in response. It's nice to finally have someone from the neighborhood visit, she said. Nobody here even bothers to say hello. We've been feeling completely isolated since we moved in. I learned from her that they were new tenants, having rented the house not too long ago. The girl introduced herself as Annie. Her mother chimed in, It's a very unfriendly neighborhood. No one here smiles or talks to anyone. We've been feeling like strangers in our own home. I assured them that not everyone in the neighborhood was like that, suggesting it might just be a matter of time before they settled in. Annie soon brought over a cup of tea for me, her movements graceful. She sat down and began chatting, saying, Since we moved here, we haven't had a single visitor until now. It's nice to finally have someone to talk to. As we talked, I found myself more and more drawn in. Annie's words were warm and inviting. Her mother seemed genuinely grateful for my visit, and I realized this was my opportunity to get closer to her. As the tea warmed my hands, Annie continued to speak, and I listened intently. Late one night as I was heading home, Annie's words came to mind. Her voice had been heavy with worry as she spoke of her mother's failing health. They had no one but each other, and every time her mother's condition worsened, Annie struggled to take her to the hospital. Her mention of trying to ask neighbors for help, only to be met with strange, judgmental looks because they were renters, brought tears to her eyes. Seeing her so upset stirred something in me. Without hesitation, I pulled out my business card and handed it to her. If you ever need anything, I said earnestly, just call me. I'll take your mother to the hospital, whatever you need. Her eyes lit up with gratitude. She smiled, thanked me, and said she'd keep my number close. Feeling good about having offered some support, I returned home. The house was quiet, empty since my wife and kids were away. I ordered some food, ate, and stretched out on the bed, ready to relax. But just as I began to doze off, my phone rang. It was around midnight. Groggily, I looked at the screen. The number was unfamiliar. I hesitated for a moment, then picked it up. To my surprise, it was Annie's voice on the other end. Did I wake you? She asked softly. No, I replied quickly. sitting up. What's wrong? Is everything okay? She sighed. My mother's asleep after taking her medicine. I couldn't fall asleep. It's so quiet and I was feeling restless. I thought I'd call you. Her tone was casual and open, as if she'd known me for years. Her lack of hesitation put me at ease. If she, a young girl, could speak so freely, why should I hold back? I began to talk to her, weaving a conversation that flowed easily. I complimented her beauty, listened as she shared her worries, and learned about her life. She told me how her father had passed away in an accident, leaving her and her mother to survive on his meager pension. Hearing her story made me feel a deep sympathy for her. I'll be here for you, Annie, I assured her. Whatever you need. She chuckled lightly. I don't need anything, she said. Just someone to keep me company, so I don't feel so alone. Her words touched something in me. It had been a long time since someone openly sought my company, and I found myself drawn to her. She even asked about my wife and children. I told her they were visiting my in-laws for a while. That seemed to comfort her, and she continued chatting, growing more at ease. Our conversation lasted until dawn. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely connected to someone, even if I was exhausted the next morning. When I woke up for work, my body ached from lack of sleep. Normally, if I'd been up all night because of the kids, I would have snapped at my wife, blaming her for my fatigue. But this was different. I didn't mind losing sleep for Annie's sake. The thought of her words, her laughter, her warmth, made the exhaustion feel worthwhile. For the next few days, a pattern emerged. After work, I'd stop by her house, check on her mother, share a cup of tea that Annie made, and then return home. Once night fell, our phone conversations would stretch into the early hours. Day by day, I felt the distance between us shrink. Our connection grew stronger, and before long, Annie let it slip, almost shyly, that she had feelings for me. Hearing her say it was like a spark igniting something inside me. I had been holding back, but her confession emboldened me. I told her that I felt the same. Her joy was palpable, and she giggled like a girl who had just been told her favorite secret. I want to meet you, she said, not just to talk. I want you to know how much I care about you. I knew I shouldn't. I had responsibilities, a family, a life that didn't include her. But those boundaries felt so far away, so irrelevant when she spoke to me like that. The distance between us had already vanished in words, and now I wanted to close the physical distance too. Her voice, her laughter, her presence in my life had become intoxicating, and I couldn't resist. I agreed to meet her. There's one problem, she said thoughtfully. My mother's always at home. It's hard for me to leave without her noticing. I hesitated, unsure. Well, what do you want to do? She seemed to think for a moment, then said, what if I come to your house, late at night when it's dark? No one would know, and we could be alone. Her suggestion made my heart race. It was wrong, I knew that, but the prospect of seeing her, of being alone together, was tempting beyond words. Her voice had a gentle, persuasive tone that made it hard to refuse. After a moment, I said, okay, if you're sure, we can meet at my place. It felt like there was no safer place than my house. The only concern I had was the prying eyes of the neighborhood, but past midnight, the streets were usually deserted. With that in mind, I invited Annie over. She agreed to come at night, and sure enough, around midnight, she arrived at my door. Quickly, I ushered her inside and locked the door behind her. She followed me to my bedroom, and my heart pounded furiously in my chest, threatening to leap out. I was completely smitten, overwhelmed by the thought that tonight she would be mine. In that moment, I didn't think of my wife or my children at all. I was consumed by the desire to indulge in the moment, to fulfill my selfish cravings. When Annie took off her shawl and set it aside, I was stunned. She was dressed in modern, stylish clothes that left little to the imagination. Her entire being seemed to glow, her makeup enhancing every feature, her radiant smile drawing me in. She sat beside me, holding my hand, speaking of her feelings, her longing, and her love. I couldn't hold myself back any longer. As I leaned in toward her neck, she placed her hand gently over my lips and said, I've come to your home for the first time, and you haven't even offered me anything. Won't you give me something to eat or drink? Her request surprised me. I hadn't prepared anything. She then asked for a glass of water, so I went to get it. When I returned, she was opening a bar of chocolate. She held it out to me, saying, "You should have some too." When I declined, she broke off a piece, put half in her mouth, and offered me the other half. Her gaze was so alluring, her movements so deliberate, that I couldn't resist. I took the chocolate from her lips, our eyes meeting. She was mesmerizing. I held her face in my hands and confessed my feelings for her. She smiled back at me, receptive and encouraging. The room seemed to close in around us as the connection between us grew stronger. But then I began to feel lightheaded. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and before I knew it, I blacked out completely. When I woke up the next morning, my entire world had been turned upside down. I looked around, and the sight left me reeling. My home was ransacked, every cupboard and drawer wide open. My valuables, my hard-earned savings, everything was gone. I couldn't think straight. I sat there in shock, trying to piece together what had happened. And then the realization hit me. Not only had she taken my belongings, but she had left me physically scarred in ways I never imagined. I wasn't just robbed. I had been brutally violated. The pain was excruciating, but I didn't know what she had put in that chocolate that left me completely unconscious through it all. I felt a crushing sense of loss and pain, a mixture of physical agony and emotional devastation. With no other option, I called the police. Within a short time, officers arrived. The news of the robbery spread quickly throughout the neighborhood. Everyone was talking about it. Somehow, word reached my wife, and she came rushing back, without the children, distraught and concerned. When I saw her at the door, my heart sank. How could I possibly explain what had happened? How could I tell her that in her absence, I had invited another woman into our home and paid the price? The police were determined to understand how the thief had managed to break in. They were perplexed. My house was heavily secured. After a string of burglaries in the neighborhood some time ago, my wife had insisted we fortify our home. Every wall had been reinforced with metal bars. The entire perimeter was sealed. There was no way anyone could have entered unless I opened the door. I hung my head, ashamed. Finally, I confessed to the officers that I had let someone in. I tried to explain that it was a girl from the neighborhood who seemed in need of help. As I spoke, my voice faltered. I could feel the judgment in the room, the weight of my actions bearing down on me. She had come to me to take her mother to the hospital. I was the one who allowed her into the house. In front of my wife, I carefully mentioned the girl's presence, trying not to reveal the full truth. I was terrified that if my wife found out what I had done behind her back, she would leave me. As imperfect as she was still the mother of my children. She loved me, and I couldn't bear the thought of losing her. I had wanted only a few moments of peace, a brief indulgence, without it affecting my life with her. The police officers then asked me for the girl's description. I was called down to the station, where they showed me several photographs. Among them, I recognized Annie's face. When I pointed her out, one of the officers smirked. "This girl doesn't have just one name," he said. "She goes by many names. She changes her appearance, moves from neighborhood to neighborhood, and finds lonely men to exploit. She gains their trust, takes advantage of their solitude, and then empties their homes." The officer's words sent a chill through me. He looked me in the eye and continued. "You might have hidden the truth from your wife, but I know what happened. This girl only gains access to homes when men themselves invite her in, driven by her youthful charm. Just like others, she probably injured you as well. Did she give you something in that chocolate? Something that made you lose consciousness?" The officer's casual yet pointed question made my hair stand on end. He added, "Eventually, your wife will find out what really happened. It's better if you tell her yourself." I stood there ashamed and unable to meet his gaze. My shameful secret had been laid bare. He showed me more photographs of Annie. What shocked me most was that her long, lustrous hair wasn't even real. She wore wigs to enhance her appearance. Without the makeup and the wig, she was an ordinary-looking woman. The police confirmed they were searching for her, and I returned home. When I arrived, I found my wife sitting with her head in her hands, tears streaming down her face. "This happened because of me," she sobbed. "If only I hadn't left, none of this would have happened. You worked so hard for all of this, and now it's gone. I'm to blame." She was blaming herself for the disaster. I looked at her closely, really looked at her. She seemed different. There were no signs of exhaustion, no dark circles under her eyes. Her complexion seemed brighter, as if she had become the woman I remembered from years ago. As I held her hands, I noticed how soft they felt. When she realized I was staring, she asked, "What's wrong, Mazar? Why are you looking at me like that?" I hesitated, then asked, "What have you been doing these past few days?" She fell silent for a moment before replying, "My mother took care of the children. At night, I finally got to sleep peacefully. During the day, my younger sister did the cooking, and we had a maid to handle the cleaning. I didn't have to do much, so I just rested." Her answer hit me like a blow. It dawned on me that her worn, tired appearance hadn't been natural. It had been the result of the burdens I had placed on her. She had always been beautiful, but the constant responsibilities of raising 4 children and managing our home had left her worn out and disheveled. Perhaps she truly never had the time or energy to focus on herself. When the realization hit me, it felt like the weight of my mistakes had finally come crashing down. I sank to my knees in front of Zara, my voice trembling with guilt as I confessed, "Zara, please forgive me. I've made a terrible mistake." She looked down at me, startled, her face a mix of confusion and concern. Then, with tears streaming down my face, I recounted everything, from the very beginning to the bitter end. I spared no detail. As the words spilled out, the enormity of my betrayal became even clearer, and I broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. For what felt like an eternity, Zara sat there in stunned silence. Her eyes didn't leave me, yet I couldn't tell what she was thinking. Was she furious, heartbroken, or simply too overwhelmed to respond? My heart raced, fearing the moment she would speak. I couldn't bear the thought of her saying the words I knew I deserved, that she would leave me. Then something unexpected happened. Zara reached out and gently ran her fingers through my hair, her touch both tender and steady. She wasn't angry, she wasn't yelling. Instead, she spoke softly, almost as if comforting a child. "I'm not angry at you, Mazar," she said. "I'm upset at myself. Maybe if I had taken better care of myself, if I had put in more effort to look good for you, you wouldn't have felt the need to look elsewhere." Her words left me speechless. Here I was, on my knees, expecting a storm of reproach and condemnation. Instead, she was blaming herself. And in that moment, her kindness felt more unbearable than any anger she could have thrown at me. The very fact that she would take any responsibility for my actions struck me to my core. This was a woman who had done nothing but give. Her time, her love, her energy, and yet she believed she hadn't done enough. Tears poured down my face as I grabbed her hands and vowed, "No, Zara, no. This was all my fault. I should have seen what I had right in front of me. I should have cherished you, appreciated you." I gripped her hands tightly. "I swear to you, I'll never look at anyone else again. I'll never make you feel less than the queen you are." Hearing this, Zara laid her head against my chest, and for the first time in what felt like forever, we sat together in silence. No accusations, no blame. Just 2 people holding on to each other, tears flowing, trying to mend what had been broken. We stayed like that for what must have been hours, both of us finding some measure of healing in that shared vulnerability. After some time, I gently lifted her chin and said, "Come on, Zara, let's go out. We'll withdraw some money from my account and do some shopping. I'll get you everything you need for the wedding. New clothes, shoes, everything. We'll get things for the kids, too. And we'll attend that wedding looking our best." She blinked at me in disbelief. It had been so long since I'd shown her this kind of care, so long since I'd even thought about spending money on her or the children. For years, I had been detached, indifferent. Now here I was, offering to do something that once would have seemed second nature. Her eyes glistened with gratitude, and a small, hesitant smile formed on her lips. She looked at me as if she couldn't quite believe I was serious. But I was. I took her hand, and together we left the house. For the first time in years, I felt like I was stepping back into the man I used to be. the man who cared about his family, who wanted his wife to feel special. As we wandered through the market, I found myself enjoying the process. I asked her opinion on colors and styles, watched her face light up when she found something she liked. Each purchase felt like a small act of redemption, a way to start making amends for the years of neglect. When we got back home, the children came running to see what we had brought. I saw the way they looked at Zara, their faces beaming, as she held up new clothes and toys. In that moment, I realized I had not only neglected my wife, but my entire family. For so long, I had allowed work and my own selfish distractions to take precedence. But seeing their joy, seeing Zara's smile, I knew I could do better. I had to do better. Over the next few days, I focused on Zara and the children. I helped her with household chores, played with the kids, and sat down with Zara just to really talk, like we used to when we were first married. Slowly, I began to feel the rift I had created start to close. It wasn't instant, and it wasn't easy, but step by step, I could see Zara trusting me again. Her laughter returned, her energy came back, and I began to feel like the man I had been before I let the weight of the world turn me into a shadow of myself. Looking back, I realized that the incident with Annie, as painful and humiliating as it was, had served as a wake-up call. It forced me to see how much I had taken Zara for granted, how blind I had been to her sacrifices. I knew I didn't deserve her forgiveness, but she gave it freely, showing me a depth of love and strength I had never truly appreciated before. Now I say this to every husband who may read my story. Do not look for peace outside your home. Cherish your wife. Honor her. See her not as someone who serves you, but as the heart of your home, the keeper of your joys and sorrows. Your wife is not a mere ornament or a convenience. She is your partner, your equal, and the one who will stand by you when the world turns its back. Zara taught me that love is not about perfection. It's about effort, patience, and the willingness to rebuild even when everything seems broken. And for that, I will be forever grateful.